Hey everyone. First, I want to start with thanking all of you for being here. This event is now third year. The first year we had 300 people in the crowd. Last year we had 450. This year we had 650 people register. So big round of applause for the team. We do this event every year because we want to grow the tech scene in Southeast Asia, something that we're really, really passionate about. We want the scene to grow. We want more people to become entrepreneurs. We want more investors to back those entrepreneurs. And eventually, at some part of the process, we want people to buy those great companies created. I wanted to give one shout out to a gentleman called Marco. Marco, are you in the room right now? Marco right there. Big round of applause to Marco. I'll tell you why. This event is modeled on the #1 tech event in Europe called NOAH. And we at Catcha have been going to this event for the last 5 years. And I'll tell you the reason why is because one of the fundamental things that I believe is that Silicon Valley does not have the monopoly on great ideas, does not have the monopoly on great execution, and doesn't have the monopoly on just creating great, sizable companies. There's great internet companies created in India, China, and particularly Europe. And for the last 5 years, we spent a lot of time studying all the great companies in Europe, and we would get a lot of inspiration from those companies, more so than the companies in America. So if you ever have a chance to go to NOAH, look up this event. It is the greatest internet event if you want to study what are the big successful business models. Marco's here, and he's presenting at the end of today on the top 10 sizable unicorns in Europe. And I'm willing to bet that most of these companies are companies that you've never even heard of, yet they're multi-billion-dollar companies. And many of these companies are ideas that people haven't even brought to Asia yet. So that is definitely something to look out for. Thirdly, one of the reasons why we do this event is the tech scene. One of the things great about it, it's a work hard, play hard mentality. So I've been asked to tell you that there's free drinks at 5 p.m. every day outside, and there's free drinks at 9 p.m. every day as well. If you look at the agenda, you'll see where. Last thing, I want to thank, there's a very famous saying, and I wasn't sure if it was a man or a woman who wrote this saying, and it said, if you want a great job done, give it to a man. If you want a fucking amazing job done, give it to a woman. So I want to give a big round of applause to all the women in the room. But more importantly, I want to give a round of applause to the Wild Digital team, because the Wild Digital team are actually, with the exception of one gentleman, are all women. So big round of applause to Linda, Julianne, Lucia, Claudia, Jody, Melody, and the entire Wild Digital team. So if you see anyone wearing a Wild Digital paraphernalia, give them a big hug and say thank you so much for putting this together. Okay, 7 reasons why now is the best time to be in ASEAN tech. #1, and we all know this, there are now 300 million people in Southeast Asia with a smartphone. And this is not a new statistic, everyone knows this. But I'll tell you why this is important. This number is growing every year. Next year when I stand on stage, the number will be 400 million. Why is this number important? Is because we have already overtaken the number of smartphones in America. We've already overtaken the number of smartphones in Europe. So why is this important? Because every time when you build an internet business, the #1 thing you've got to figure out is how big is my total addressable market? How many people have the potential to use this product? So we live in this great time and age where there's now more people within a 2-hour flight of this room than all of America using phones, and all of Europe. So what this means is that we have now, for the first time ever, the potential to build companies bigger than the companies that you hear about in Europe and the companies that you hear about in the US. #2, I'm sure you've noticed this, but you never really picked up on this. The propensity for using social media is greater in Southeast Asia than in any other part of the world. Let me say this again. So people in Southeast Asia use social media more than any other part of the world. So what this means, and I don't mean that we have more users, what I mean is that we spend more time on social media. So for instance, the #1 country in the world for social media usage in terms of hours per day is the Philippines. In the Philippines, people are spending 4 hours per day on social media. Compare this to America, where people are spending 4 hours a day on TV. In the Philippines, it's the complete opposite. It's 4 hours a day on social media. Thailand, 3.4 hours a day. Malaysia, 3.2 hours a day. So Malaysia has a little bit of work to catch up to Thailand and Philippines. When you think about these numbers, it's insane. When you think about other first world countries, the numbers would be around 2 hours a day. So our social media usage is pretty much double most other parts of the world. The most tweeted event ever in the world was from the Philippines. There was 40+ million tweets on one particular event from the Philippines. The most Instagrammed place in the world is Siam Paragon Shopping Center in Thailand. So it just reinforces that if you're going to build a great sizable business, you really got to think about the social aspect, because everyone in this part of the world is addicted to social. This is where you advertise to them. This is where you market to them. This is where you communicate to them. Thirdly, I've been in the internet industry now for 16 years, and I would say for the first 14 years of my career as an internet entrepreneur, there was probably zero government support in anything that we were doing. Zero. And many times the government didn't even understand what the internet industry was. In the last 2 years, you've pretty much seen every Southeast Asian government make a massive public commitment to saying that we want to do something big for the digital economy. You look at Singapore. Singapore has committed to be a smart nation ASAP. Yesterday, a large company in Thailand, together with government, committed 500 million US to a venture fund. A month ago, I was really, really honored to share the stage with Jack Ma and the Prime Minister of Malaysia to announce the world's first digital free trade zone. This is a huge, huge commitment that you're now seeing the government recognize that, number one, we're all on social media for 4 hours a day, so as a government, we better do something about it and support it. Now, what I find very interesting is that while Southeast Asian governments are super supportive of the tech scene, you look at the Western world, where governments are actually doing things that don't support the tech scene. Look at America, which just recently banned entry from a number of great countries in the Middle East, which is a huge blow to Silicon Valley, because if you look at a lot of the top tech talent in Silicon Valley, a lot of them come from these countries. So one of the things that we need to recognize is that there's a huge wave behind us that we need to ride on. One of our companies, this is iFlix, we took this photo yesterday. iFlix is proud to say that of the 7 countries that President Trump banned, we have hired great talent from at least half of those countries. So a big round of applause to the iFlix team. So it's interesting. In the US, the top 4 companies are referred to as FANG: Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. In China, BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So in ASEAN, we now have 3G, which is Grab, Gojek, Garena. And what's interesting about these 3 companies is that they've all proven that you can build multi-billion-dollar companies in Southeast Asia. You know, they've proven that Southeast Asia can build unicorns. 2 years ago, if you'd said Southeast Asia is going to build multi-billion-dollar tech companies, no one would believe it. They say, we're too poor, we're too small, no one's interested in this part of the world. Well, today we now have 3. I'm willing to bet by this time next year, we'll probably be 5 or 6 more unicorns originating from Southeast Asia. Fifthly, we now have a massive pool of people who are interested in the internet industry and technology. Not only do we have massive companies that have done great things, and later on today I'll be interviewing Tony from AirAsia and Anthony from Grab. One of the things I want to single about AirAsia is that many of you think of it as an aviation company. I actually think of it as an internet company. AirAsia.com is the largest e-commerce site in Southeast Asia. It has more online transactions than Amazon, Lazada, Zalora, or any other e-commerce site you can think about. They process over $1.5 billion US online every year and have been doing so for the last 10 years. So if you actually think about who invented e-commerce in Southeast Asia, it was actually AirAsia.com. What else we're finding more interesting, and this goes back to my point about governments, is that the governments are proactively educating people now so that they have skills relevant for the tech world. Malaysia will become one of the first countries in the world to implement coding, as in how to program and build a website, as part of the national curriculum. I mean, this is an incredible, incredible thing that Malaysia has recognized. I don't know if you guys realize this, there's a government body in Malaysia called MDEC. It is the Malaysian Digital Economy Corporation. It is a government body whose sole job is to help the internet economy. America doesn't have such a body. Australia doesn't have such a body, but Malaysia does. So it just goes to a point that the governments are really going full out to create the talent and make available the financing to build great companies in the region. I want to close with two amazing global trends which really reinforce why this is probably the greatest time ever to be involved in building a digital company. First one, the time it takes to build a company worth 100 billion US has dramatically shrunk. 100 billion US, why I chose that number is because if you added up the valuation of every publicly listed company in Malaysia, you'd get about 100 billion US. So this is another way of looking. How long does it take to create value equivalent to every company in Malaysia? Disney took 92 years. So the interesting thing about Disney, if you look at the founder of Disney, Walt Disney, he wasn't even alive to see Disney become a $100 billion company. Comcast, 52 years. Microsoft, 24 years. Oracle, 23 years. But what's been fascinating, in the last couple of years, you're now seeing companies create 100 billion US in value. So once again, that's recreating the entire Malaysian economy in anywhere from 9 to 15 years. Tencent, 15 years. Alibaba, 13 years. Facebook, 10 years. Google, amazingly, in 9 years. So within just under a decade, Google created enough value that is equal to the entire value of Malaysian companies. What I'm willing to bet on is that this will get even faster and even rapid. There'll probably be a situation 5 years from now where someone in the world, hopefully from Southeast Asia, will create a $100 billion company within 5 years. Lastly, we all talk about disruption. And internet is disrupting this, Airbnb is disrupting hotels, Grab is disrupting public transport, and so on and so forth. Let's actually look at the numbers of disruption behind it. In 2006, it's a little bit complicated, so I'll take a while to explain it. In 2006, we looked at what is the total valuation of every company listed on every American stock exchange. And we figured out what that number was. And then we added up the valuation of all the publicly listed internet companies. We looked at what percentage of American companies is attributable to tech companies. In 2006, this was 2.5%. So that means tech companies are only 2.5% of the total wealth that companies had created. In 2015, that number had become 9%. So you can see that tech companies were getting bigger and non-tech companies were getting smaller. Today, tech companies now constitute 15% of total value creation in America. It doesn't sound like a big number. It's only 15% of 100%, right? But what is more interesting is when you look at what is that annual rate of disruption every year. So far in America, every year, internet companies take 3% of the total value from non-internet companies. So think about that, 3% a year. So if you extrapolate that, that means by 2027, which is just about 10 years from now, internet companies will represent 50% of the total value of the economy. So what it signifies two things. Number one is that the tremendous growth that internet companies are going through, but secondly, the tremendous decline that non-internet companies are going through. Because for someone to create value, someone's lost value. Now you fast forward to 2037, 20 years from now. So this is within all of our lifetimes. Within all of our lifetimes, this stat will switch completely. So that means within 20 years from now, internet companies will be 85% of the total value creation in the American economy. So what that means is that when you think about companies that don't have the internet as their core purpose or as their core distribution method, will they exist? Will hotels exist in 20 years? Will everyone use Airbnb? Airbnb? Will shopping centers exist? Will everyone use Amazon? It's a well-publicized statistic that no new shopping centers have been built in America in the last 15 years. This is the country that invented shopping centers, yet there's been no new shopping centers built in 15 years. Because who wants to build a shopping center when more and more people are going online? The next time you walk down High Street in any major city, whether it's New York, whether it's London, whether it's Singapore, you will notice more and more shop fronts are empty. This is a global phenomenon. All of the major shopping streets in the world now have empty shops. Why? Are people shopping less? No. People don't shop in shops anymore. They go online. So if you start to extrapolate this over 20 years, that means if 85% of everything we do is done online, you start to wonder, do hotels exist? Do shopping centers exist? Do office buildings exist? Anyway, I don't want to paint a doomsday scenario, but what I do want to say is that today is probably the greatest time in history to be involved in the internet sector in Southeast Asia. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Have a beautiful time.